So, having your child lead their own IEP may sound like a lofty goal, because so many times when we think of wonderful opportunities for our kids, these "but what about" kind of things come into our head, right? So last week we talked with our guest, Carrie Potter from Illinois, and we were talking about not only having your child lead their own IEP meeting, but having your child inviting friends to come and also participate in the IEP meeting. So we had lots of viewers and great questions and comments. So I thought we should do a part 2 today to talk a little bit more about those nitty-gritty details. Because sometimes it's like, wow, that sounds great, Charmaine, but how do we really do it? So that's what this show is going to be about. But if you are here with us live, first, I would love for you to say hi, where you are viewing us from, because it's always fun to see different people in different states and how we all come together with our live Facebook show. So let me know who you are. Let me know that you're here so I can give you a shout out. And I'll quickly introduce myself. If we haven't met, I'm Charmaine Tanner. I'm a parent, a retired teacher, an author, and a full-time special education advocate. So my passion is to help parents like you become even better advocates for your kids. And as we become better advocates, guess what? Our kids see us modeling those advocacy skills, and they become terrific self-advocates. And that's what, I don't know, life should be about, right? That we feel confident with ourselves, that we have something important to share, that we're respected, that we're seen as competent, and that we can speak up for ourselves. So even when your kids are little bitty, that is a great time to start giving them choices, having them make decisions, even though they're small, little kind of inconsequential decisions. But as your child gets older and as they start attending school, and especially if they have an IEP, then we want to make sure that their voice is heard, because the IEP is really about them, right? So I see we have some viewers live, so say hi. I'd love to welcome you to our show. And if you're watching the replay, still feel free to make comments and ask questions, because I come back to the show and I'll respond to all of those. But as I was saying, last week we talked about students leading their own meetings. And one of the things that I think we really got to keep in mind is this whole notion of what the I in IEP stands for. Because I think often teachers and parents alike will forget, maybe more the staff forgets, that I stands for individualized. So when we're talking about your child participating more or leading their own IEP meeting, it's going to be individualized. Okay. Last week we had a parent write in and said, well, what about if the student is nonverbal and autistic? What does that look like when they go to their own IEP meetings? And we'll talk about some specific things that examples in a couple of minutes for that. But that's the important part, is that depending on your child's age, depending on how many times they've gone to their own IEP meetings, what you plan and do are going to be totally individualized. So I had said in the post intro that today we would talk about 3 must-do steps if you want to make sure that this whole student-led IEP process goes well. So the 3 steps are plan, do, review. And what's kind of interesting to me is that this is not only when we're looking at our child coming to the IEP meeting, but these are the steps in a lot of ways that we have to do as parents to get ready for IEP meetings, okay? And Raylene's here. Hey, Raylene from San Diego. And so I know sometimes people across the country have been getting snow in lots of different places, and they probably would love to say they're in San Diego today. Lissa's here. Hey, Lissa. I know she's enjoyed the snow because she's been skiing, right? So welcome and thanks for being here. And the rest of you who are joining us live, say hi so we can greet you. So what we're going to be talking about are how we can do some ahead of time advocacy steps. And to me, one of the biggest things that we can do is to make sure we spend some time doing some planning. Because especially if your child hasn't attended their own IEP yet, all of this is going to be brand new to them. So there's also a chance that the teachers in your child's school haven't experienced students coming to their own IEP meetings. So it's going to take some planning with the teachers also before your child just kind of bops in and says, here I am. And so again, depending on your child, you're going to have different planning steps to do. But I think one of the first ones is that we want to make sure that our child feels comfortable. We want them to have a say in exactly how much type of input they want to give, how long they're going to feel comfortable at the meeting. And all of that can be individualized. So some parents just have their child come for the beginning part of the meeting and talk about their strengths and their interests. And that's fabulous. You know, other parents, the child is there for the whole meeting. And if that works, great, right? And as students become, I don't know, like middle school, high school level, some students are excited about really being the facilitator of that whole IEP meeting. And that's terrific too. So your child can be involved at different levels. Don't feel like, my son or daughter's only been coming for a few minutes. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Give yourself permission to say what we're doing at this time is great. And you can build on that for the next IEP meeting. But one of the things I was going to say when we're talking about planning is not only what your child feels comfortable saying or sharing, but how they're going to do that. So if your child is nonverbal, look at the communication system or the communication device that they use and make sure there are choices in language programmed in that communication device so your child can use that during the meeting. Because your child doesn't have verbal speech doesn't mean that they can't contribute and participate. So we just sometimes have to be a little creative, but for sure, use the communication system that your child uses every day and make sure that's available for the IEP meeting. And a teacher, a retired special ed teacher, wrote in on our comments last week, and she was saying that as a special ed teacher, she always would work with her students before it was time for their IEP meetings. So she would do almost like a mock interview kind of setup with them where they could be used to people saying like, oh, so what do you like about school? And what their answer would be. Or if a teacher asked them, how did you feel like, it went last year when we used this accommodation? Or, it could be a question like, who are your friends at school? Think of some of the questions that they might be asked and then have your student practice that and role play with you. So special ed teachers can get involved, but it's going to take planning on your part to connect with them and ask them to set aside some time for that. As parents, we can set aside time for that at home to go over that and make sure that your child feels comfortable. So let me see. I think we've got some comments here. So yeah, Alyssa. Oh, and Nancy's here. Hey, Nancy. And Nancy's from Colorado and Lissa's from Idaho. So far we've got 3 states of people who are viewing and spoke up. So what we're talking about is no matter what your child's situation is, there is probably a way that we can come up with ways that they can share. And so some of the ideas that other parents have used is their child doing a PowerPoint with a lot of photos to show what they like to do, what they're interested in, who their friends are, what do they do with their family, because I think it's important to get to, for the teachers to get to know your child on a real human level and not just from reading reports. And then, I was thinking for students who are nonverbal, we talked, a couple of minutes ago about making sure if they had a communication device that it's programmed. For some students, it might be actually just bringing objects that are really important to them. I was at one IEP meeting, and the student brought trophies that she had won from different sporting events or team competitions and everything. And so just by having those objects and her being able to share that with the staff, even though she wasn't, communicating verbally about it, it was like great. It was like so cool. I mean, you could see the student being excited about it. The teachers were listening. And so bringing things that are, objects that are important to your child could also be something. You've probably all seen the different versions of About Me books. Those are great things to bring to IEP meetings. Some people will bring a photograph of their child if their child doesn't feel comfortable being there. Just have some way that we recognize and honor your child at each IEP meeting because it is about them, right? So there's that planning part. You're going to talk to teachers. You're going to talk to your child, maybe do some role playing. Have your child decide who they want to invite to the meeting. Now, there's a given. There's going to be the special ed teacher. There's going to be a general ed teacher, right? But how about your child being able to bring someone else? I mean, as parents, we always say, don't go by yourself. Bring somebody, at least for moral support. But think about students. It makes such a difference when they have friends there with them. They're not the only young person sitting at a big conference table with all these adults. But the other students come up with great ideas too. So when you're planning, plan who your child's going to invite to the meeting and make sure that communication goes out. If it's students that are going to miss class time, they need parent permission, kind of all those little details. But let's talk next about the second step, which is I'm trying to see if I'm showing this. I don't know if it's showing. Here we go. So after you plan, the next step is just do it. So put it into motion. Try it out for size, right? If you've done student-led IEPs before, if you want to type yes in the column or the comments, that would be cool. So Lisa has a question here. Let me bring it up and we can look at it. So she says, Charmaine, how do you handle a meeting where your child does come, but parts of the meeting turns into a bash session on negativity and behavioral issues, etc., in front of your child? I've had that happen too. And I felt that wasn't good to have him talked about as a problem. In that particular IEP instance, I had him leave. And Lisa, yeah, I think that's kind of the fear of it's like, what's going to be said in front of my child if they come to their IEP meetings. And I think, yeah, I think you did a great thing. You kind of made a decision in the moment. And I think that was probably, for me, that would be what I would want, is that I would just say, at this time, I think Dylan can go back to class and we'll continue this discussion. But I don't know, and it depends on your style. But for me, I would probably want to say something first to the people that were saying the negative statements, and just to, kind of say, I just want to remind people, one of our ground rules is to be respectful and to focus on problem solving and looking at each of us and what responsibilities we have. And I think this might be an area where we could continue on a discussion and, have my child go back to class or have my child, wait out in the hall. It's like really awkward, but you do have to protect, I think, your child from hearing lots of negativity. I mean, I know parents have done that with parent-teacher conferences, and their child is in the conference with them, and all of a sudden it like takes this ugly turn. And it's something that, we just have to decide. I think probably for most of us, Lissa, we would do the same thing. I don't know. So Raylene and Nancy, chime in and let us know. And I think that's the thing. If you know ahead of time, there's going to be a touchy subject, like the category, the label that your child is going to have, that can be something that it's like, is this really going to be helpful for my child to be on this, at this table when we're discussing something that as a parent, there's going to be some disagreement. And your child hearing a certain label might trigger something. So there are going to be those touchy times. As much as we can, we try to predict that ahead of time and say, let's have my child for this part of the meeting. And then when we get to this part, it will just be the adults of the IEP team. I mean, it just kind of depends. And I always figure I should have, like in my advocacy toolkit here, I should have like a big box or whatever, package of depends, because it's like always, it depends on what, the exact situation is. But one of the things that I wanted to ask or kind of emphasize when we've done the planning, now we're actually doing the meeting, is I really want to make sure whatever your child shares gets written in the IEP. Because so many times what I see is students are coming in, they've got this PowerPoint or this, presentation that they practice. They might be a little nervous, but they're also excited. And the rest of the IEP team, appears to be listening, and they're kind of nodding their heads and smiling. And it's like, yeah, but did anybody just like write that down? And for some reason, it's like if the speech therapist gives a report, for sure that's going to be summarized at least in the IEP, right? If the special ed teacher gives her report, that's going to be in the IEP. So how is it so many times when parents give input, or especially when students give input, that all of that is just kind of like, oh, that's so nice. Yes, thanks for letting us know. That's great. But it's just this, it feels like this token input instead of really being validated. So when you're going through the IEP meeting, if your child is going to be there for more than just the beginning of the meeting where they're going to do a presentation, I really encourage you to have your child have input for all the different sections of the IEP. So I like to start annual reviews talking about last year's goals. And so I want my child to be prepared to say, I felt really good because I really, started doing better in math and, whatever, and have them give some input on their goals from this past year. And then you usually, hopefully, start talking about the student's strengths and interests and things like that for student and parent input. Of course, this is like an excellent spot to get your voice heard, right? But again, you want to be looking at whoever is taking notes or whoever is typing on the computer there in the meeting, that your words, that your input, that your child's input gets typed into the IEP, okay? It's not just like, oh, isn't this nice? We have students come to their own meetings. No, it's like they've got important things to say. They need to be able to say that, but we want to make sure that it gets captured in the written document. So Raylene writes in, and so let me show you her comment. And let me make sure that, okay, good. She said, Wyatt hasn't attended an IEP yet. He is 12. And until his last IEP, they have all been very negative. We finally have a team now that will listen to his input, so we might try for his next IEP at the beginning. Yeah, that'd be cool, Raylene. And that's why I say it's individualized, right? Because if it's not going to be, a positive experience for you, then you don't necessarily want to subject your child to that negative experience either, right? And so, yeah, I think that's wise. As parents, you make that judgment call. Is this going to be helpful or not? And so it's not like an all or nothing. It's something that you can, cater to the situation that your child's in. So place a high value on what your child is sharing to be in the IEP. When you go to the goals section, have your child have input about what kinds of goals he or she would like to set for themselves. When you're in the accommodations section, have your child share what accommodations really help them and which ones aren't like so good. And it's like, we might as well take these out of the IEP. And this is also a great place if you have brothers and sisters or friends of your child, for them to also chime in and talk about what they know works and doesn't work so well with your child. That input is so much richer than what we usually get at IEP meetings. And so sometimes it's going to be a heated discussion and you don't want your child there. What I would encourage you to do is still find a way. Have your child make a short video on his phone that you can share with the IEP team when you are there. Have your child, make a PowerPoint. And if he's not there because you're, worried about the tensions, you share it for him. But try to find even little ways that your child's presence can be felt at the IEP meeting. And let me check, because I want to make sure I have. So Lissa says, right, that's exactly what happened in my son's last IEP meeting. I've seen the special ed director write my son's input down, but then when I got a copy of the IEP, nothing was listed about it. Luckily, I was able to just email the director about it, and she wrote it in. Cool. Yeah. So that's so good. And it's like a really good habit for us to, actually read the IEP when we get it back, or the meeting notes, and correct anything that's not accurate. And there you could see it wasn't like the director, I don't think, intentionally left those out, and she seemed more than happy to include them. So sometimes just bringing that to people's attention is, a great way to resolve that. And so Lissa says, Charmaine, have you ever had anyone that tried emailing the team ahead ahead of time and asking that the IEP meeting be free from bashing or negativity. And then she adds, in front of your child. So yeah, I think that's where that planning stage happens, and that's where it's individualized. You know the IEP team, you've been working with them, and so sometimes it's a quick phone call, a quick face-to-face meeting, an email, and say, I just want to remind us all that my child will be attending the meeting. We really want it to be focused on ways that we can work together, things that have gone well and that we want to build on. If there are any, potentially negative types of situations you want to discuss, please let me know ahead of time. Maybe we can talk about it before the meeting, or we can talk about it at a time when my child isn't actually present at the meeting. So yeah, I'm the type of person that it's like, I would rather lay my cards out and say, this is one of the things that I'm kind of worried about. So can we just, and then when you get to the meeting, I think you can do just a quick, let's all remind ourselves to be respectful as we're listening, and not do any negative attacks. And we're in this room to be a collaborative team. So I'm looking forward to a great meeting, something quick, but just to kind of bring it top of mind at the beginning of the meeting that, this is going to be a good, positive experience. So if you have any other questions or comments, make sure they're coming. Nancy, if you have something to add to our conversation, feel free to jump in. If you're watching the replay, I come back and read your comments. I answer your questions. So please still participate as you watch the replay of the show. And then another thing that Mary, a member of our private membership group, and Alyssa knows Mary, and she had a neat idea that she posted in our membership group the other day. And if you're interested in learning more about our private membership group, we actually call it, I don't know if it's coming up here. You can just type membership in the comments, but our group is called Parent Advocate Trailblazers. And tonight we have a strategy session, which I'm calling our virtual pajama party, where we're going to get together and do some strategizing with each other and helping each other out. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I'd love, Nancy and Raylene and others watching, if you're interested in our membership group, just type in the word membership. In my IEP should get to you and let you know the link and where the link and the details are. But Mary had this great idea, so I kind of made a table of it. I want to show you here. So let me bring this up. So Mary had talked about this idea she saw on Pete Wright's website, where for parents, you write down, have a chart similar to this. And Mary said, she wanted to turn this around and use it with her son. So there would be 3 columns. One, what the student needs, or, like what the student is asking for. I try to stay away from the word want, because the law doesn't say you get what you want. Your child only gets what they need. So anyway, your child could have a column where they keep track of like the main topics that they want to bring up. And then in the middle, there's a column for the school response. So your child can record, like the school said, no, can't do that. Or they said, sure, we'll try that. And then the third column was the issue resolved? And, I think, again, all of this needs to be individualized. I mean, some students aren't going to want to sit down and take notes like that. For Mary's son, and I think it sounds like a cool idea for a lot of students, having a paper like that where they actually are keeping track of what was said. And so they have a reminder that they can use to, like, oh, really? In the IEP meeting, we agreed that this was going to happen or whatever. I mean, that would be a way that your child could be kind of actively involved throughout the meeting, whether or not they're talking. Now, for some students, you might think, for your child, it's like, I don't know if they can sit still for a whole IEP meeting. So then you figure, are they going to be there for part of it? Or I think they can stay the whole time, but I'm going to have a backup plan. For my son, Dylan, when he comes to meetings, sometimes it's like, he's listening, but he may not exactly be looking at everybody all the time. But if he has an agenda and a pen, he loves it because he circles a number or the letter. He'll circle the words. He'll look at the phrases. He'll read it to himself. So it's a way for him to still be there and to be, listening. And if somebody asks a question, he can respond. But he doesn't necessarily, just kind of sit there without anything to do and make it a very fun experience. So think, some parents will bring, something, an iPad, a phone, not that you always need electronics, but there's something maybe that you have as the backup plan if your child starts, having to kind of, have a sensory break or whatever. So we've talked about planning, we've talked about doing and making sure that your child's comments and input is actually inserted into the IEP. Now, our third step is the review step. So we had plan, do, and now we have review. And this is to make sure that you take time to celebrate things that went well in the IEP meeting, because, we all like to have that reinforcement that whew, that went really well, especially these parts I felt really good about. So help your child celebrate those times, and also help, depending on the age of your child, help your child know that throughout the year, sometimes they need to politely remind teachers oh, I'm supposed to have this accommodation, or if they don't say the whole word accommodation, oh, remember when I do a test, I go to a quiet room, or, so when the IEP meeting is done, it's not like your advocacy is done, right? We know that as parents and students, as they're developing self-advocacy skills, they need to know that there's still more that they're going to have to do. One parent wrote in from last week and said that this whole, idea of her son going to his own meeting really backfired because he really got invested in writing his goals, really working hard on them throughout the year, and he didn't accomplish those goals, and he internalized that and felt like a failure. So there's such a fine line, right, between getting our kids involved in more of their own advocacy and knowing as parent advocates, sometimes we get shut down. Sometimes things don't, the communication doesn't go as well. So all of those things we need to address. And so, one of the suggestions I would have is, instead of waiting a year, maybe every month, every progress reporting period, not only do you want to check in with the teachers and see how things are going, but again, bring your child and have them hear and have them be able to give input about how they think things are going. So plan, do, review. Your 3 must-do steps, right? So if you have any other questions or comments, let me do a quick check here and see if we have any new comments that came up. I would love for you to join us if you want to be a parent advocate trailblazer with us. And that's in our private membership group. You just have to type membership in the comments, and my IEP bot will send you a message with the link. Next week, we're going to have a special guest that I'm so excited about. And it's going to be an evening show. So instead of next Thursday at noon, we are going to be talking with Charlene Comscott-Galligan, and we are going to be enthusiastically looking at how we can build more inclusive schools and communities. So I'm like super stoked to have Charlene with us as a guest next week. She's going to be available in the evening. Next Thursday's show is at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Until we see you then, I'm Charmaine Tanner. I'm passionate about helping you become an even more effective advocate so your child is safe, happy, and learning every day with his friends in school. So until next Thursday, I shall see you then, and take care. Bye-bye.